What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. And the first weekend of regional championships is in the books, featuring the European Regional Championship in Bologna, Italy. And it was an absolutely amazing event. While there was a lot of things that happened that we kind of expected to happen in the standard metagame, there was something that kind of caught me off guard. And of course, we're going to be tackling all of that in this video. We're going to be going over the day one, day two metagame breakdowns, of course, the win rates of each of the individual decks, plus their even individual matchup matrix of how they actually fared playing against some of the other decks in the format, and of course going over the top 8 and finishing off with some thoughts and opinions, because there's going to be a lot of conclusions that we can kind of draw from this event that players are going to be carrying into the future regional championships, and it's going to be important for us to look at when looking at the United States regional championships, and of course regional championships happening all across the world over the next month. So you definitely do not want to go anywhere, as we're going to be tackling the majority of those events here on the channel and doing our own breakdowns, and of course expanding upon our thoughts of how this kind of season is going to go, because this is very important. Obviously, players are trying to qualify for the Pro Tour and potentially even the World Championship towards the end of the year. They're going to be very big events, and of course, again, this is very important to be able to understand the information that we're kind of going on. So let me be your guide in this journey as we break down the Regional Championship Europe from Bologna, Italy. Of course, before we get into any of that stuff here in the video today, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where we talk mainly about the modern standard format, as well as some other longer form videos, such as this one where we break down all the major events going on in Magic the Gathering, then please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell so you know when future videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. And if you want even more content, you can go to the description down below. You can go follow or go join my Discord server, link in the description down below, as well as throwing me a follow over on twitch.tv/Crowday23, where I think we're going to be getting into quite a bit of standard here with the regional championships going on, featuring the standard format, of course, while also tackling a little bit of modern here and there, because that is the regional championship qualifier season, and I'm an absolute Yawgmoth degenerate, so definitely go over there and check out the Twitch channel. Lastly, I want to shout out the Casual Spikes podcast YouTube channel, where me and my co-host Randy over at MTG with Randy try to post weekly episodes talking a lot about the major events going on in Magic the Gathering, try to break down the metagame as best as possible, break down certain matchups, and of course, try to be our own entertaining selves when go over some other news going on in the world of competitive Magic. So if any of that interests you at all, please go ahead and check out all those. They are linked in the description down below. Lastly, for real this time, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. Manatraders is a monthly subscription service that you can pay for, where you can go and rent cards on their website and play them on Magic the Gathering Online, where you can go and play in the various different leagues that they offer through however many different formats now at this point, as well as playing in challenges and trying to qualify for the Pro Tour through the online circuit. This is an amazing service. Honestly, I've had it for years at this point. They're always improving it. It's really awesome. And I can't really give it any more of a stamp of confidence from me anyway, because again, it's a service I've used for so long. You can rent cards, so you can basically play whatever decks that you want to play. If you decide that, you really want to play the deck they have built in paper, maybe you want to go try something else before you end up actually investing your actual real world dollars into it. It's a great service, and I can't really give them any more of a thumbs up than I can already. But, be sure to use my code in the description down below. You get 5% off your monthly subscription. With all that said, let's go ahead and start our journey here looking at the day one metagame for Regional Championship Europe. So here we have the day one metagame breakdown for the European Regional Championship. And as we kind of talked about in our preview video on Friday, I kind of expected the aggro/pixie decks to be the most played decks, right? They were the most played archetypes, seemingly showing up all over the place in various different online challenges. So I think it was just pretty natural that we would see stuff like Mono Red aggro, which has kind of breaking away from the other aggro variants that we've seen, where Gruul was kind of the most popular, and then we kind of teeter back and forth, and it seems like Mono Red has just kind of, pushed past what the Gruul aggro deck offers, where players just want to play the fastest aggro deck and really have a sort of kind of a way to shift into a little bit more of like a slower, like mid-range deck, where they're still going to be able to put out massive amount of damage and just a few attacks, while also being a little bit more resilient to some of the other aggro decks and like those kind of mirror matches. And of course, Esper Pixie being the version that can, I think, on a dime, really turn up the pressure and make your opponent really regret their decisions of registering anything else, just from the amount of flyers that they have and the amount of +1/+1 counters they can throw around with their creature that, of course, I cannot remember, that just cares about your enchantments entering the battlefield. And of course, those hopeless nightmare draws where you just get to play it 3, 4, 5 times over the course of like 3 turns is absolutely insane, and just definitely puts your opponents in a very bad situation. What I did not expect was that the aggro deck that was going to be at the top of the metagame, because I really thought it was going to be between Mono Red and Esper, is actually Is It Prowess, and it was by far the most played deck at 16.7% of the metagame. This is featuring the new card, Corey Steelcutter, which we're going to talk about a lot more here towards the end of the video, but Corey Steelcutter has seemed to be the difference maker for this Is It Prowess deck, and of course featuring one of the best red creatures that we thought was ever really going to be printed in Magic, at least for a short time, in Outlaws of Thunder Junction with Slickshot Show Off, where that card was just poised to be an absolute difference maker. And we kind of saw it at Pro Tour MH3 last year, where we had like a Gruul aggro deck, and it was definitely a game changer. It was definitely a focal point of like, this card is going to allow us to win the game on like turn 3 very consistently, for the fact of like, of course, Modern having a bunch of free spells and cards with alternate costs that essentially make them free, and things like that. You know, it was just going to be a complete just decimation of that format. And you know, this is now a time where we can actually see this Is It Prowess deck just absolutely take center stage, because this was a deck that players had been slowly picking up and playing over the course of the last few weeks since the release of Tarkir Dragonstorm, and Corey Steelcutter seems like it is the real deal. And of course, an aggro deck can now exist in the format that isn't just playing the mice package, and that's really the big difference between this Is It Prowess deck and like the Mono Red, the Gruuls, and even like the Rakdos and Boros, things like that, is that instead of playing this mouse package, and instead of trying to just output tons of damage through this kind of package that has seemingly been the best aggro strategy for the better part of almost a year, Is It Prowess has, you know, found a way to break away from that. That being said, Mono Red aggro is the closest deck behind it at 10.9% of the metagame, 117 players registering this deck. This is, you know, the Manifold Mouse, Heartfire Hero, and Emberheart Challenger, Monstrous Rage, you know, pepper in some burn spells, throw in the Angry Mercenary Lizard, and you just have one of the most consistent damage outputters, as the, you know, eloquently as I can put it. This deck is going to be one of the fastest aggro decks in the format. It can be faster than Is It Prowess. Is It Prowess does have some draws where, yeah, it can put out tons of damage and potentially kill your opponent on turn 3, but Mono Red aggro is going to do that way more consistently than the Is It Prowess deck is, and it's going to be, I would say, versus the non-Corey Cutter Steel draws from the Is It Prowess deck, is going to be a little bit better against like very removal heavy hands. Like, yeah, it's going to suck when your best threats get eliminated pretty early on, but then you have all these other creatures that are just kind of pains to deal with. These kind of like 2-mana haste creatures, 3-mana haste creatures are going to get in, deal a ton of damage. On top of that, too, if your opponent just isn't really pressuring you either, like, you're eventually going to be able to close out the game with your burn spells as you kind of chip in for damage. Esper Pixie behind them at 10.5%, 112 players registering the deck. This has essentially been the, I would say, the go-to mid-range deck of the format. It seems kind of weird to call it that because it doesn't have mid-range in the name, and of course we've seen Dimir mid-range start to pop up and play, of course being at 5.5% over on the other side of the kind of like archetype graphic here. And it's been a deck that has gone over several changes. You know, we've seen, you know, decks just completely drop the white and they just play blue-black. We've even seen, you know, here on the other side, direct other side of it, Orzhov Pixie being a deck that, you know, they just drop the blue entirely. They don't need things like this Town 8 big enough. They don't need Storm Chaser's talent. They don't need Hopeless Nightmare, Fear of Isolation, things like that. It can just play the really good cards and play this more control strategy. I really like Esper Pixie for the fact that this is a deck that feels like it can be very aggressive early on, where you can just like play a Hopeless Nightmare on turn 1. You play Pixie, pick up Nightmare, play Nightmare, you know, get your opponent to really just start discarding cards and putting a lot of pressure on their hand to be able to perform and put pressure on you, while you're also able to just interact very effectively with cards like Nowhere to Run and Grim Bauble, and being able to, again, pick them up with things like Nurturing Pixie. This Town Ain't Big Enough just being an absolute difference maker and a fantastic card, even still in this metagame, when you're not necessarily using cards like Up the Beanstalk to get additional value off of This Town Ain't Big Enough. So definitely a deck that is still very powerful. I think spoilers, I didn't have really like the best weekend, just kind of at a quick glance here. But, nonetheless, it is still a very powerful deck. It has so many draws that are just, where you aren't able to really beat it because they're able to put so much power in play and also make you discard a bunch of cards and make you lose enough life where in just a few combat steps, you're going to be at 0 life and getting ready for the second game. Jeskai Oculus was a deck that we pointed out, along with Jeskai Control, those holding down the 4th and 6th spots in the metagame at 8.6% and 7.3% respectively. Jeskai Oculus, of course, is in this like Abhorrent Oculus / Helping Hand where they're trying to get Abhorrent Oculus into play. It's one of the best 3-mana cards that you can get in, but it is also playing on this axis of playing like Prof's Eidetic Memory, which is going to allow you to draw, you're going to draw a bunch of cards thanks to Steamforce Scholar. We've seen Tersa Light Shatter in the deck where these are just cards that allow you to draw additional cards, as well as things like Fear Missing Out, where a Fear Missing Out plus a Prof's Eidetic Memory is absolutely insane because you're going to be able to, put a bunch of counters on a creature and then be able to attack with it. And then if you have Delirium, the Fear Missing Out is going to be able to untap certain creatures, and then you're going to be able to have another combat step, and you're going to be able to attack again, and just get in tons of flying damage on your opponent. Of course, making the damage-based removal even harder to deal with these creatures because they're already, at 5, 6 toughness, whatever the case may be, especially after getting counters from Profs, and it's going to make it very hard for the mono-red aggro decks to deal with. And even from the Esper Pixie side, where it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to bounce it. As they bounce the Profs, you still have a very big flyer. If they bounce the flyer, then you're going to be able to replay it, and it's going to get those counters back anyway, thanks to Prof. So it's just kind of a different way of attacking the metagame here. And then, of course, the Jeskai Control is just like your typical kind of control deck. Shiko plus Stock Up is an absolutely amazing combination. There's also a bunch of other cards that you can flashback with Shiko that are going to get you insane amounts of value. Plus, it's a card that is going to close out games very quickly. And crazy enough, Jeskai Revelation, who knew a 7-mana, sort of kind of counterspell, we've kind of seen it with like the Magma Opus where players were kind of finding a way to cheat this thing out, whether through like I think it was Hanada was like the creature where like they could play it and it's gonna like cost 1 less for each target, so you end up targeting a bunch of things and it costs like 4 mana or 2 mana, whatever the case may be. But in any case, this is a deck that has proven to be really good. Things like Lightning Helix has been awesome against the mono red aggro decks where you're able to kill the creature and gain a little bit of life on the back end as well to kind of negate some of the life loss and make it a lot harder for them to close out the game when you're kind of gaining all this life. Plus main deck Beza is kind of a house against that deck. Azorius Omniscience, just being able to put Omniscience into play, in some way, form or fashion, even with Abuela's Awakening. I'm not sure exactly how this deck wins. I think I'd seen a way where like some Azorius Omniscience players just like loop just the Jeskai spell that we were just talking about in the Jeskai Control deck, which is absolutely insane work, diabolical, if you will, and that's really sweet there. Domain Overlords, 69 players, nice 6.4% of the metagame. The biggest of the big mid-range decks, you're going to outcard advantage your opponent. You're going to be able to put however many lands into play every single turn, thanks to Overlord, plus just hitting your land drops for drawing cards. Up the Beanstalk has been one of the best cards in Magic for a while, banned in multiple formats. It's just... This deck is kind of had been the go-to post Pro Tour and had slowly fallen off thanks to decks like Mono Red Aggro, which just beat up on these Overlords decks where they're kind of playing this a little bit slower game plan. They're wanting to draw cards. They're wanting to kind of like sculpt their battlefield. Like turn 3, turn 4, they're kind of set up, but by that point, they're at like, at best case scenario, maybe a handful of life, and they're really hoping to just slam their Zur and animate one of their Overlords and end up gaining a bunch of life back. And even then, there's times where that's just not going to cut it. So Domain definitely on a steep slide. The fall off is real, but it's still a very powerful deck where we're kind of seeing some of these other mid-range decks, kind of like Esper Pixie hanging around. Jeskai Oculus is sort of kind of this mid-range strategy. Jeskai Control, Dimir mid-range, all these kind of strategies where Domain can actually thrive. Dimir mid-range is something that we've been used to. Was at one point one of the best decks in the format. Now just kind of a pretty good pick for a while here, but not a deck that I would necessarily take to a regional championship as of now. Orzhov Pixie, definitely a more mid-range / control version of the Esper Pixie deck, just not playing blue. Gruul Prowess seems to have picked up Corey Stillcutter. This is a deck that, for a while could do a lot of the things that Mono Red was doing, but definitely had a more mid-rangey-esque slant. in the main deck, where if it ran into some of these grindier matchups, I can kind of hang with them and eventually just try to push over the finish line after an aggressive start, has definitely well fallen out of favor, in favor, of course, of the mono red strategies. Azorius Control has been pretty popular and picked up some popularity before Tarkir Dragonstorm, and now with like Jeskai Revelation, Shiko, and getting access to cards like Lightning Helix, it seems like Jeskai Control is kind of the way to go over the Azorius builds. And 16.3% of the metagame being an other. Again, I did not expect this kind of to be the breakdown. I expected there to be definitely more mono red and Esper Pixie towards the top of the metagame, and I mean, they were the second and third most played deck, but Is It Prowess being by far and away the most played deck, I would definitely say it had an argument for being one of the best decks, and it seems like players have agreed that this is one of the best decks, if not the best deck to be playing currently. Now, just because a lot of players do register the deck does not mean it does well. We've seen players register things like Dimir midrange and Golgari midrange at pretty high numbers, and then them having absolutely abysmal tournaments here. So, of course, this doesn't really mean too much to us until we go and see the day 2 metagame breakdown. So let's go ahead and hop over and look at that day 2 breakdown. So here we have our day 2 metagame breakdown, and Is It Prowess is still the most played deck in going into day 2. You had to have a 6-2 or better record, 18 plus match points. Is It Prowess had 35 players in the day 2, of the day 2 players, 35 of them at a 55% win rate. That is absolutely amazing. That was kind of the problem that we had with like Domain, where, we had seen some of the Pixie decks and some of the aggro decks being at like 50-ish, 51, even 52% is fine, but 55% is where we start getting into kind of like a dangerous territory, where if you're kind of up there in win rate, it's pretty insane, especially when you have a deck that is played a lot. Like typically what you want to see is that if there's a lot of players playing a deck, you want to see it kind of closer to 50%. If there's not very many players, kind of like this Boros Monument deck and Mono Black Demons that you see over on the right hand side, where they have like a 67 and a 63% win rate, 2 players making day 2. There's probably not a lot of players that register it, and potentially just ran into some pretty favorable matchups. It's like something where you can at least to a point kind of surmise that it had a pretty good run. There's a good chance that if there was as many players playing it as there was Is It Prowess, it wouldn't have a 67 to 60% win rate, more than likely. But that's kind of like what you can see from these sort of things. So we definitely want to see more players playing a certain deck, and we want to see that win rate be more towards like the middle of the pack, about like 50, maybe 51% here. So 55% day 1 win rate for Is It Prowess, crazy. Jeskai Oculus having 19 players, that is the second most played deck at 54%, which is a pretty high win rate for that deck as well. It was at a little less than half of the field, compared to Is It Prowess. 54% is pretty high, and, I think that's like okay. I think for both of these decks, it's okay right now until we kind of see how the rest of these regional championships shake out. But if, Is It Prowess and Jeskai Oculus hold like this, 54, 55, even like 56% win rate throughout the course of the regional championships, then that's kind of where we start heading towards problem territory. Esper Pixie and Mono Red Aggro both performed at under 50% of 50% win rate with 15 and 14 players. This is kind of where we expect some of these other like high volume decks at, right? Like 49, 48%. Of course, we don't know if it's like almost 49 or almost 50% for either one. But in either case, like this seems totally fine, especially since these decks look to be pretty problematic going into it. Azorius Omniscience, 52%, not insane. Dimir Midrange, 11 players at 48%. Jeskai Control, 52% win rate with 9 players. And as far as I know, that there was like a decent amount of Jeskai players in the Oculus and Control camp that were very, 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 very close to making the top 8. So let's see how that plays out. Domain Overlords, 48%. How the Mighty Have Fallen. Orzhov Pixie at a 53%, which I think is a lot to do with the fact that this Orzhov Pixie deck is pretty good against the Mono Red Aggro and Esper Pixies of the format. So I would say that if you're expecting a lot of that, Orzhov Pixie is a pretty good choice overall. I would still play Is It Prowess just because of my experience. That deck has been absolutely insane and has turned me into a believer. And of course, Boros Monument and Mono Black Demons, 2 players making day 2 with a 67 and 63% win rate respectively, which is crazy that people are playing Archfiend the Dross here in this late into 2025. But you know what? I'm here for it. Archfiend still goes crazy, and you might as well play it while it's still legal. So that is the day 2 breakdown of the regional championship. We're going to be going to something. We'll look at the matchups, the matchup matrix, and the win rates of the individual decks here over the course of both days before we get into the actual top 8 bracket. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the win rates from this regional championship. So overall, we have the win rates for some of the more played decks of the format here. So we have Is It Prowess towards the top with a individual game record of 613 wins, 486 losses, and 4 draws. Good enough for a 55.8% overall win rate, with Jeskai Oculus shortly behind it at 54.6%, Orzhov Pixie at almost 52.5%, Jeskai Control at 51.5%, Azorius Omniscience at 51.1%, and now here's where we start getting into the sub 50s, where Dimir Midrange and Gruul Mice were just short of 50%, 49.4% and 49.1% respectively. Domain Overlords at 48.6%. Esper Pixie having a worse win rate than Domain Overlords, and especially in a format with as much aggro as we had seen here, is pretty surprising. Mono Red Aggro even performing at about 47.8%. Gruul Prowess not faring too much better at 47.4%. Cage is a deck that had looked really exciting really since it kind of broke out at the Spotlight Series in Atlanta. Now looking too good here. Mono White Token's a deck that I thought could kind of find a way to find a home now in the standard format, thanks to Elspeth just being a really powerful card to help kind of close out games. Not really performing that well. Same with Azorius Control and Golgari Midrange, absolutely embarrassing at 33.3%, with the rest of the metagame being at a 45.4%. So pretty crazy there. Something notable, and I want to point out in the Is It Prowess deck, of course, it doesn't have the mirror matches. But a 58% win rate against Mono Red Aggro, 56% against Pixie, 55% against Omniscience, only a 46% against Jeskai Oculus, which it seems like Oculus is going to be one of the decks that players are probably going to gravitate towards here going into these regional championships. I don't expect the Esper Pixie or the Mono Red Aggro decks to necessarily fall off a cliff, but kind of with as poor of a showing and then all these decks kind of starting to break out, we could see those numbers dip while also seeing more Is It and Jeskai decks, period, just kind of popping up more in towards the top of the metagame here. But yeah, pretty crazy. Some stuff that we expected here. Domain Overlords, of course, the Is It Prowess deck is really fast. It does have a very aggressive slant to it. It is a little bit weaker, I would say, to removal from the non-Quarry Steel Cutter draws. I say that because when you do have Quarry Steel Cutter, it's just a whole different ball game playing this Is It Prowess deck, and we kind of saw that with Dimir Midrange, where Is It Prowess has a 60% win rate, and Mono Red Aggro has it has a 58% win rate against Mono Red Aggro there. So pretty cool stuff. I would say even for the Mono Red Aggro decks, it's kind of insane where, it did beat up on the decks that we thought it would, playing against Jeskai Control, Domain Overlords is kind of a deck that'll eat up. And then having a 47% win rate against the Dimir Midrange, and then 39 against Jeskai Oculus, which is pretty bad for it because now I'm going to expect it to kind of, up the amount of Jeskai Oculus decks that we're going to be seeing going from this tournament into the next one. So, go ahead. You can pause it, check out the matrix for yourself if you want to look at some of the other individual win rates. But that was kind of stuff that stuck out to me. Even Azorius Omniscience having a 75% win rate against Domain Overlords is absolutely diabolical stuff. But yeah, that's the individual win rates for these decks. Pretty crazy overall. Is It Prowess almost at 56%, Jeskai Oculus at almost 55%. Absolutely insane work here, and even better for Is It Prowess because of how many more copies of that deck were actually in that tournament, and it was at almost 56%. Just seems like it's going to be by far and away at least the most played deck. Whether it's going to be the best deck after we kind of get some adjustments in the metagame, we'll end up seeing there. But yeah, let's go ahead and check out the top 8 of the tournament, and then we're going to wrap up with some thoughts. So, of course, this is the most updated bracket that I could find for this regional championship. But as we kind of see here, going from, the top of the bracket down, the number 1 overall seed was an Is It Prowess deck in, I'm not going to try to say that name. I don't know why I thought I had that kind of confidence. But the number 1 seed playing Is It Prowess up against Mono Red Aggro. And, of course, the Mono Red Aggro being fiercely slain by Is It Prowess 2-1. We can move on to the 4-5 matchup in Dimir Midrange versus Dimir Overlords. Domain Overlords, not Dimir Overlords. Dimir Midrange actually winning that game, considering that we kind of talked about how Domain is just the bigger of the midrange decks, and typically that's what midrange matchups end up coming up to, is just, who is the bigger mid-range deck, who can play and slam the bigger threat on the table. Domain, of course, across the board, I think has a lot of bigger threats, but the Dimir mid-range deck able to kind of overpower Domain Overlords as a team and move on to where it faces Izzet Prowess in the semifinals, which I really feel for the mid-range player there, because Izzet Prowess is very good. Again, with the Corey Steelcutter draws from the Izzet Prowess deck, it just ends up eating up a lot of the mid-range decks if they're not able to actually deal with Corey Steelcutter. In this 2-7 matchup, we have Dimir midrange, which was the 2 seed, versus Izzet Prowess, which was a 7 seed, and Dimir midrange absolutely getting dispatched. Hopefully for the other Dimir midrange player that it does not turn out this way for them, but Izzet Prowess moves on. And then we have Izzet Prowess versus Mono Red Aggro here in the 3-6 matchup, and Izzet Prowess overpowering Mono Red for the 2-0, putting 3 Izzet Prowess players in the top 4 of the event, with a lone Dimir midrange player, which would not have been the deck that I would have had up there in the top 4. But interestingly enough here, if you've been paying attention to the kind of the matchups here, we don't actually have any Jeskai Control, Jeskai Oculus. We don't have the Azorius Omniscience deck. Even the Esper Pixie deck also missed out. So there's a lot of our top deck, our most played decks from day 1 and even in day 2 not converting all that well and not being able to convert any of it into a top 8. Of course, we have 3 Izzet Prowess decks. We have 2 Mono Red Aggro players, 2 Dimir midrange, and a Domain Overlord. So definitely a slightly more classic, I would say, of 3 to 6 months ago, with Izzet Prowess, obviously, of course, being the newcomer and absolutely just smashing face here. So up to the semifinals, we had Izzet Prowess versus Dimir midrange. I'm not exactly sure how these matches actually finished up, but I know that Izzet Prowess did end up beating Dimir midrange, setting up essentially an Izzet Prowess finals for the event here. And I believe it was Ivan who ended up actually winning the 7 seed Izzet Prowess player, beating the 3rd seed Izzet Prowess player to move on with a 1 versus 7 matchup, in which I believe that Ivan ended up actually winning the event and, of course, solidifying Izzet Prowess as the deck to beat, I think, in Standard, for the fact of, it just has a lot of things going on for it. And, of course, we're going to wrap up and kind of the thoughts. So congratulations to Ivan for winning the event. Just absolutely amazing. Izzet Prowess seemed to be the play all weekend, and kind of like what we had seen from the Teamer Breach decks during the Modern Regional Championship season. They were able to identify the deck that was the best deck in the format, and seemed to have a very good 75 to bring to the event, and then it absolutely just crushed it again. 3 Izzet Prowess players in the top 8, all of them converting it to at least a semifinals finish with a mirror match in the finals, and qualifying 2 players for the World Championship, and of course all these other ones qualifying for the regional for the future regional championship, for the Pro Tour, all that fun stuff, which is really kind of the big thing. But of course, getting an invite to the World Championship and $20,000 in your pocket is not so bad either. So that's how the tournament concluded. Let's go ahead and finish up with some thoughts here and try to wrap this up as best as we can. So I think the main takeaway from this event is the fact that Izzet Prowess is in fact the real deal. And I think it's carried a lot by the card Corey Steelcutter, and this is probably the 1B to the 1A point. Corey Steelcutter is a fantastic card. This is one of the best cards that you can potentially have in these sort of mid-range matchups where your opponent is going to try and go after, one creature at a time. They're going to have to spend actual cards to deal with your token creatures, because these 1/1 Prowess monks that Corey Steelcutter is going to make are going to be very hard to deal with. And the fact that don't even get me started on the multi Corey Steelcutter draws, where if you have 2 or 3 of these in play, I mean, I've played a few games where I've had multiple Corey Steelcutters where it's literally play it on turn 2, then play it on turn 3, and play another 1-mana spell, trigger both of them, and then just for the rest of the game, make 2 monks every single turn, have these giant prowess threats that your opponent's not really going to be able to keep up with, and keeping them off the board. Sure, they can have bigger creatures, but it's really hard to have bigger creatures while also kind of containing those sort of cards on the board. I'm not saying that it's necessarily impossible. I just think Corey Steelcutter is an absolutely insane. It is a diabolical card for players to be playing in Standard right now, and it might just be the best creature, the best card in Standard early on here, and it just has kind of given a lot of life to this Izzet Prowess deck. But make no mistake, either the Izzet Prowess deck isn't just Corey Steelcutter or bust. Yes, it is a very powerful card. It's a way that you can just make a ton of prowess creatures every single turn, or really just 1 to 2, depending on how many you have every single turn. But the fact that you still have these draws where you play a Storm Chaser's talent, or you play a you play a Monastery Switchbeard on turn 1, and then you go and plot a Slickshot Show Off on turn 2, and then you play the Slickshot Show Off, you play your 3rd land, you play 3 1-mana spells, whether it's some combination of cantrips / burn spells / monstrous rage, you're going to be able to get in a ton of damage, or you can just simply play stock up, and then increase the likelihood that on turn 4 you're going to absolutely just eliminate your opponent from the game, brutally ejected. It's honestly a sad sight to see, but it is something that can happen. This deck is no slouch, and really the fact that it is, I would say, probably on average potentially slower than the mono red aggro deck. I'm not going to necessarily split hairs, where at best I would say that that they're like close, but I would say that mono red is the more consistent, faster winning deck. And Izzet Prowess doesn't need to be the fastest deck. It's a deck that that is very explosive. It just needs you to have, one turn where you put the shields down, or one turn where you don't have it, and it's going to absolutely just punish you by hitting you for a ton of damage. And on top of that too, when you introduce this element of just being able to kind of go wide and just get to play out, these Storm Chaser's talents, getting able to trigger the Quarry Steel Cutters multiple times, and of course getting like the card selection that you get, and to a point card advantage with the stock up. It's amazing. The deck is absolutely through and through awesome. It deserves to kind of be in this spot because it plays the role of being an aggressive deck very nicely. It doesn't have to be the fastest. It just ends up being like the second fastest deck in the format. On top of that too, it ends up being a very grindy deck as well, being able to beat the various different control strategies. It just kind of fits in this perfect slot where if you're playing mid-range, it has the speed to beat you, and if it has Quarry Steel Cutter, it has the means to kind of grind you out as long as it's able to kind of keep the card advantage kind of flowing. And if you're an aggro deck, it can race you, or it can kind of keep you off kilter enough while also applying a lot of pressure to you, because they're just going to get a bunch of value from casting your spells. Their creatures are going to get bigger. They're going to be able to kill one creature, kill another creature, hit you for 7. I mean, that's just how it's going to end up working out a lot of the time. So a lot of players had to figure out what to do about this Izzet Prowess deck, because just playing removal isn't going to help in a certain amount of their draws, and just trying to race them isn't really going to work out very nicely for you either. But I do see things like Esper, specifically probably the mono red aggro decks. I've seen a lot of players already playing things like Abrade in their sideboard as like ways that this is like a 2-pronged card, where if you need to kill Quarry Steel Cutter, it has the mode to kill Quarry Steel Cutter. You need to kill a creature, it has the mode to kill a creature. And the fact that it deals 3 damage is going to be pretty big for the fact that Monstrous Rage isn't going to be able to save something like a Slick Shot, which is one of the best aggro creatures in that deck, again, for the fact that you're going to be able to deal massive amounts of damage to your opponent and really put them in the hurt locker, put them in a lot of pain and suffering. Again, for the fact that you just need like that one window as the Izzet Prowess player to output tons of damage. But, mono red seems to already be kind of making the adjustments now. Whether there's going to be further sideboard adjustments, there's going to have to be, right? I think a lot of people were expecting it, but were probably trying to play against it like you would a traditional aggro deck that just had maybe a little bit of longevity. And it turns out that you need to, take off the kid gloves. You got to be able to kind of go aggressive against this deck and try to hopefully not get blown out by Spell Pierce, because Spell Pierce is just a very annoying card. The fact that it exists in Standard right now is very good and very bad for a lot of the players who are trying to kind of deal with the stuff going on here. And that's going to be the big thing is, can Izzet Prowess keep up this dominance? And I think with the card Quarry Steel Cutter and just the very nature of the deck, it absolutely has the staying power to continue to be one of the best decks in the format. But I also think that there's a lot of tools out there that these decks can kind of move into to kind of help mitigate that sort of thing. And I think mono red is just about there with enough mid-range in the format. We could see something like mono red just be able to kind of speed past those decks, and then also having some pretty good answers post board for these Izzet Prowess players. So it's going to be something to keep an eye on as we work towards the first regional championship, which I believe is going to be for the United States in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So that's going to be pretty cool. It's coming up here in a few weeks, and I'm very excited to see more live Paper Magic and see how this standard metagame kind of evolves. If we're going to see, Izzet Prowess jump up to like 20-25% like we had seen with the Teamer Breach decks in Modern, or are we just going to kind of see it, you know, maintain kind of the same play rate? Maybe players are going to gravitate towards something else, or you know, we'll definitely see between, you know, this event and the online results how players respond to just the dominance of the Izzet Prowess deck. And yeah, that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed the breakdown. If you did, please leave a like on the video and comment down below what you enjoyed about the European Regional Championship, maybe what you like about the standard format, any of that stuff. I would love to hear what you have to say in the comments down below. Of course, subscribe to the channel if you're new, or you just want to see more videos from me where we're going to be doing these event breakdowns for all the major regional championships going on across the world. On top of that, too, getting prepared for the Pro Tour that is coming up in, I'm sure, short order, that, you know, I'm going to find out that is like next weekend or something crazy like that. But that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. I hope to see you all in the next one.